NPD and Capitol Police took just over 80 people into custody surrounding the riots on Wednesday. Democratic leaders of 5 House committees are seeking an immediate briefing from the FBI on its investigation of the violent breach of the Capitol, which left 4 people dead. The FBI are still looking for hundreds of others. So what goes into a manhunt of this size? Joining me now is George Mason's Richard Denholm, a former FBI Special Agent, and Supervisory Special Agent Scott White, a professor at the GW College of Professional Studies and a law enforcement expert. Good morning to both of you. Thanks for joining us.
Morning.
Good morning.
My first question here that I think maybe some others are wondering as well is, given all of the resources and the funding that an agency like the FBI gets, why would they need the public's help in identifying some of these people who weren't wearing masks? And obviously there's photos of them all over social media. Richard, I'll start with you.
Well, good morning, and thanks for having me on. The key thing with any investigation are the people involved in it. So that's both the investigators and then the individuals involved in the criminal activity. So they're looking for sources, people who can identify other people, and they're looking for cooperation from the people who were actually on scene. So if people were in there, it would be a good idea to get in there and talk to the FBI and help them identify others. They've recently posted a reward for information. So they have to identify all these people and talk to as many people as they can. That's really the key to any one of these investigations.
Scott, what's your answer to that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I looked at it from this perspective. My career before academia was in the intelligence community. So I would be looking at all the existing intelligence that we have on these individuals. A lot of these individuals have used social media, have joined organizations. I suspect the intelligence community, law enforcement intelligence, has been monitoring a lot of these extremists for some time now. So it won't be too difficult to identify some of them.
How much would you say they're relying on the technology they have, and then, of course, already the intelligence that they have, versus the information that the public can give them?
Well, it's a combination of both. As Scott just said, the technical aspect of this is really, really important, and they will be able to identify a lot of the people just through technical means. But in any large investigation, you still have to get the agents out there and talking to people and actually getting their stories down on paper. And all of that information has to be compiled, and then they'll be coordinating directly with the United States Attorney's Office to determine what charges could be brought and who could be charged and who wouldn't be charged.
Scott, you were going to say something about that?
Yeah, I concur with my colleague. The interesting thing here is ultimately the prosecutions. And that's where the agents are going to have to come in at the investigative level to build actually cases out. It's one thing to have a picture of someone sitting in Nancy Pelosi's chair, but what actually is the crime? Misdemeanor, felony, those cases are going to have to be built. That's the legwork that agents and officers are going to have to do on the ground.
Just for some perspective here, what would you compare this to in terms of maybe a past event, right, with a large crowd, maybe a riot? What would you compare this to so that people can have an idea of what's been done in the past? Richard, I'll have you answer that question.
Well, I mean, I think I even harken back to the anthrax investigations around Capitol Hill, even in the early 2000s. I mean, it took a lot of manpower by the FBI. They didn't know how many other people were involved in the situation. So, in any other domestic terrorism event, I mean, even if you look at the Oklahoma City bombing, I mean, that investigation spread out around the country. It wasn't just in Oklahoma City. And that's what the FBI is really, really good at, because they do have 56 field offices around the country. They have agents in every territory, and they'll be coordinating leads, what we'd always call them leads, from here, and interviews would be done, and again, the reports would be written.
We did have a Capitol Police officer who died as a result of an altercation that happened at the Capitol. But it's one thing, we know there was an altercation. Of course, you'd have to figure out, the officer has since passed, who the altercation was with, that type of thing. Where do you go from there? Is there surveillance at the Capitol that perhaps could maybe string some pieces together in terms of evidence? Scott, what would you say to that?
I think the difficult thing here is that, the crime scene is actually quite large. And a lot of it has been corrupted by the amount of people that have walked through it. So in this particular case, I believe the officer was struck with a fire extinguisher in the back of the head. So I think you may be able to extract fingerprints off of the fire extinguisher and things like that. Hopefully CCTV cameras in the Capitol may have identified the individual who engaged in that behavior. But at that point, it's a very traditional homicide investigation.
Moving forward, do you think there's any, maybe any lessons learned given what happened? Do you think there's any lessons learned for the FBI agency or any other agency involved in all of this, especially as we go into the inauguration in just less than a couple of weeks? Richard, you can answer that one.
Well, sure, and absolutely. What we teach in intelligence is you can have good intelligence, but you have to liberate it. You have to share it between all the agencies and make sure that it's getting to the right people so that it can be actioned. And that's really the key going forward, is that they understand what intelligence they have, what's important, they cull out the stuff that's not important, and that it's shared to the right agencies so that it can be used so that this won't happen again.
Okay. All right. Richard Denholm and Scott White, thank you so much for speaking with us this morning. We certainly appreciate the insight.